All right, I see a head nodding. So this is our topic for today, and this is probably why you're here, because you're just super interested in long-term care costs and taking a look at Medicaid. My name is Marcia Getting, and I'm the Family Economics Specialist for Montana State University Extension. And we're a part of that land grant system where we take education out to the communities all across Montana. And sometimes we get to do it in person, but given the situation, we're able to do these webinars, which is exciting. I'm delighted to have my co-host here today. Emily always does a great job in telling you how to use your smartphone, how to use your computer, and I find I learn something new every time I watch that. So thanks a lot, Emily. And today I'm delighted to share with you that we have a guest speaker on our program, and that is my colleague Joel Schumacher. He is our Extension Economics Specialist, and he has been very involved with a program called Solid Finances. It's one that is award-winning from the Association for Financial Counseling and Planning, and he'll be telling us more about that during his time. We would also like to extend a special welcome to all of you across Montana. Carrie, who is also an assistant, put all these stars in to represent just so Marcia visually can see where people are located. And thank you. Thank you for participating. And we also have 13 out-of-staters, so you're most welcome to join us in Montana as well. Now, I would like to share with you that once you're registered, you don't need to re-register for Tuesday tips. We found that after we do a session, there's a lot of you that go and re-register again, and you just don't need to do that. And we've now got that on the website as well. Now, participant engagement rules, they tell us when you're going to do a webinar, you just can't lecture and have the talking head. So one of the things we try to do is have engagement tools. That's kind of what I'm calling them. And this very first one is a question. And what I'd like to know is, what did you do as a result of last week's session? And we had that sort of comparing joint tenancies with life estates. So if you didn't attend the session, oh, that's okay. Just check A. If you reread the Mont Guides about joint tenancies and tenancies in common, check that. So this is one that you can check as many as you did. And did you share the Mont Guide with friends? And did you happen to visit with an attorney about a life estate? And I would even throw in there perhaps a joint tenancy. And if none of these describe the action that you took during the week, why don't you just feel free to put that in the chat panel? So that's that one that Emily said is in the right-hand side of your screen. Okay, Emily, we've got that. Let's see what our results are here today. Oops, here we go. Well, we have 18% of you that are present today that didn't attend last week. So it's great that we get people, new folks every week. We did, the one that was the most popular is they shared the Mont Guide with other individuals. And I'd like to compliment you on that, because what you're doing is spreading the word about estate planning and the need for doing that. So I thank you. Okay, so we have all done something. Next one. Don't forget, you can use that chat panel at any point in time, because Emily is watching that to see if there are questions that come up that need to be answered right at the time, or if you're just making a comment like, I can't hear, well, it could be, unfortunately, you're the only one that can't, but if it's something we're doing, we'll try to take care of that. And then we have the promise that we're going to remain in the WebEx room for an extra 15 minutes to answer any of the questions that you may have. And many of you know that I'm using wildflowers as triggers to help you remember some of the things. And I did have a comment for someone that said, do not spend so much time on this. Get on with the meat of the program. And I agree. So I'm moving right on, because you're going to remember that these are triggers to help you remember things. So to give us our objectives for today, we've got the steer's head. And the steer's head is going to steer you towards an awareness of long-term care costs and information that you need to know. And Joel will be doing that for us. And then what I will do is sort of wrap up at the end, looking at Medicaid rules and regulations, just so you're aware of some of that as you're thinking of planning. So I'm going to introduce Joel again. Joel is a Montanan. I mentioned the Solid Finances program that he's world famous for. And he is also from Eastern Montana, that great community of Malta. So I have a note to myself, Marcia, stop sharing. So that's what I'm going to do and let Joel take over with his program. You're on, Joel. Go for it.
All right, well, thank you, Marcia. Let me get my screen situated here. Hopefully everything looks good to everyone. Marcia, if you can give me a thumbs up if it looks good.
Yeah, I can see planning for long-term care expenses.
All right, well, I'm going to start today, and Marcia is going to join for the second half of the program. And we're going to talk a little bit about long-term care expenses from kind of a couple of different angles. But just to make sure we're all on the same page here today, I'd like to start with a couple little bits of terminology. One being, what is long-term care? Well, it can take a couple different forms. We may most traditionally think of nursing home care in a skilled nursing facility, and that certainly counts. Also, in the last, say, 20 or 30 years, we've seen a rise of assisted living facilities pop up around the state, and they offer some different levels of care within them as well. And then we also sometimes see things like a rehabilitation facility where someone may need to stay after being hospitalized for a period of 1 to 3 or 4 weeks as they continue to recover, but don't quite need hospital care, but don't quite need nursing home care. You also may see some terms like a senior living center or some in-home health services might qualify as well. Now, the reason I wanted to mention those is it's going to matter a little bit in terms of qualification for some different programs. So first of all, why do people need long-term care? Well, the primary reason that people need long-term care is they're having difficulties with what are called the activities of daily care, or ADC. So this is they're having difficulty independently functioning in terms of bathing, dressing, eating, remembering things, those kind of things all qualify. So these aren't injury related. Typically, this is just, they have declined capabilities in one of these areas that prevents them from doing these things on their own safely in their own home. There's also another type of care, which is rehabilitation care. So this could be that someone had a surgery, maybe they had a fall, broke a bone, had a hip replacement or something, and they don't need hospital care anymore, but they're not quite ready to go home. So that's called rehabilitation care. And those sometimes take place in long-term care facilities. So someone may leave the hospital, enter maybe a nursing home for a period of 2 weeks as they continue to heal before they're ready to go back home. That's a small portion of the long-term care patient days that are sort of across the industry, but that does happen. So a good question about long-term care and planning for it is, am I going to need it? If we're not going to need it, we don't have to plan for it. Well, unfortunately, we don't have a little crystal ball we can look in to know if we specifically will, but we can take a look at some surveys. The most recent one, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has out, about 48% of people who turn 65 will not need any long-term care. So if you're in that half of folks, lucky you that you don't need that kind of care. About 20% are going to need somewhere between 1 day and a year of service. Another 8% will need between 1 and 2 years. And then, we're looking here at about 25% are going to need more than 2 years of care. Now, for same information source here, for adults that are turning 65 in the last couple of years, to kind of convert some of those things into dollar terms, about 53%, so this is the folks that aren't going in, the folks that maybe only need it for maybe a month or two, they're going to have less than $10,000 of expenses. And in terms of financial planning, that's probably manageable for most folks. About 20% are going to have somewhere between 10 and 100,000. And again, a lot of families are going to be able to handle that without too much concern. But this other 27% are going to have expenses of over $100,000, and about 15% of those are going to be over $250,000. And that's a lot more significant and a lot more challenging to prepare for financially. Now, there are some gender differences if you're planning here as well. We know that women tend to live longer than men. Women also need more long-term care services than men do. So on average, for those that need it, it's going to be 2.5 years for women, but only 1.5 for men. So what does it cost? Well, it changes. I went out and got the most recent Genworth Financial has a cost, and you can get 3 different cities in Montana. Billings is one, so that's the one that I picked. And the skilled nursing home care there is averaging just over $7,700 per month. Assisted living is averaging $4,100 per month, and then adult daycare is $2,000 per month. And adult daycare is when an individual is dropped off for, say, kind of the working hours of the day, but then taken home to live with a family member during the nights. So now there is a range between, facility A versus facility B. This is an average. And then specifically with assisted living, there are levels of care within the assisted living facilities that will impact your monthly cost as well. And you may also see things like a double room in a nursing home versus a single room, a private room. That also changes the price between the two. So who pays for all of this? Like we said, we're looking at $7,700 a month for some of these services. That's a lot of money. So here's the kind of the big picture of who pays for it. About 51% comes from Medicaid. About 20% is paid privately by individuals, just out-of-pocket expenses. Private insurance, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, long-term care insurance, pays for about 8%. And then other public sources pay for the remaining 21% of the cost. So I'm going to show you an example here. So in terms of that private pay portion, it could be these individuals are paying that portion from their current income, their Social Security, maybe they have a pension, maybe they own rental property, those kind of things. That could be part of it. They could be using their savings or selling assets like their home or other things to fund their portion that they need to pay. Now, Medicare, which again it's a primary health insurance for seniors over age 65, but it primarily does not cover what we call custodial care, which is the bulk of what long-term care days are. It does cover some rehabilitation services that might be in a nursing home facility. So like I mentioned earlier, maybe somebody fell and broke an arm. They don't need to be in the hospital, but they're not quite ready to come home. Those type of stays in a nursing home could be covered by Medicare, but that's going to be a pretty small percentage of the number of total long-term care days that are out there. Now, there's some other public programs that you might qualify for, and I'm just going to give a couple quick examples because it was a big chunk on that pie here. The Veterans Administration operates some nursing home facilities, skilled nursing facilities. There's one in Columbia Falls in Montana. I believe there's also one in the Glendive area, and I think a new one is being built in the Butte area. And veterans and sometimes their spouses may be eligible to stay here, and then the VA funds those facilities. So that's another piece that's going into that pie that I showed you a little bit earlier. And then another type of public support that you may see is a county that owns a nursing home and then provides some base funding to that nursing home. So just as an example, here in Gallatin County, there is a rest home owned by Gallatin County, and the county from their general fund budget provides $300,000 a year of funding to that facility. So it's not for a specific person's bill. It just generally lowers the operating costs that they need to cover from patient days. So just some other examples of what those look like. Now, the largest payer is Medicaid. Again, different from Medicare. And this program is primarily designed for low income and low net worth individuals. And I'm not going to talk any more about that one because Marcia's going to finish the second half of our program today, discussing the ins and outs of Medicaid. Now, the piece I want to focus a little bit on is long-term care insurance. Typical health insurance generally does not cover long-term care costs. So the same insurance, whether it be care or whether it be maybe you're under 65 and you have traditional private healthcare insurance, generally long-term care expenses are not going to be covered by your health insurance. So long-term care is a type of insurance policy that's specifically designed to pay for these long-term care expenses. Most often people begin to purchase this coverage between the age of 50 and 70. So you don't see a lot of 25-year-olds out there shopping in this market, but you also don't see a lot of 85-year-olds shopping in this market. The time to purchase this is not at the time that the service is needed, but in advance of that. So people that are in their 50s and 60s are commonly considering this type of insurance as part of their financial plan. Now, there's a couple terms that I would like to kind of go over with long-term care insurance because it's a little different than health insurance, but in some ways it's kind of the same as well. So first of all, most policies are going to have written into them a maximum daily amount that they will pay. So regardless of what the cost of the facility that you go into, they're going to say, we're going to pay $100 a day maximum towards this, or $200 or $225 a day. The other thing to keep in mind is oftentimes they have an inflation adjustment. So if you buy a policy when you're 55 and you end up needing care when you're 82, the price will have changed over time. So a lot of times an inflation adjustment is written into that policy. So it's a maximum of $200 per day today, but it's adjusted for inflation. So when you actually end up needing it, the inflation adjustments may have increased that $200 to say $247 or something over the course of those years. There is a maximum lifetime benefit. Usually you don't see them below $50,000, but certainly they can be 100, 150, 200,000 are not unusual amounts to see in a long-term care policy. They also have an exclusion period, and it's typically stated in days. So when you enter a nursing facility, the policy will not pay for a period of 7, 10, 14, 28, or 30 days. And you can think about that a lot like the deductible on your traditional health insurance policy. So the longer the exclusion period is kind of like having a higher deductible health insurance plan. It also tends to lower your cost if you have a longer exclusion period, if you have a lower daily benefit amounts, or if you have a lower lifetime benefit. Those are going to be things that reduce the cost of your long-term care insurance policy. Another important thing to consider when you're looking at long-term care insurance is what level of care they will provide. Will your long-term care insurance contribute towards home health? How about an assisted living facility? How about a skilled nursing facility? It's good to look at those definitions and have that discussion when you're considering purchasing a policy like this. You don't see it very often anymore, but you did read about stories 20 or 30 years ago where assisted living facilities were much less common and then may not have been covered under a long-term care insurance policy. So then someone had the choice of being home or being in the nursing home to get their insurance benefits when they really only needed a mid-level of care provided by the assisted living facility. So it's good to know what you're buying and how to compare the two. So I want to walk over an example because I think this is the easiest way to explain kind of how a policy like this would work. So we're going to look at one policy, and it's going to have a 14-day exclusion period. So again, that's like our deductible. It's going to have a $100,000 lifetime maximum payout amount. And then the most it's going to pay on any given day is $150. So how is this policy going to work for Jill if she had purchased it and she needs to enter a nursing home on May 1st? And the cost of that nursing home is $225 for each day for our example. So from May 1st until May 14th, when she first enters that, the long-term care insurance is not going to pay anything. That's the exclusion or waiting period that goes on. So it's kind of like meeting your deductible before that policy will kick in. And then on May 15th, so the first day after the exclusion period, the long-term care insurance is going to start paying $150 per day to that nursing home. And then the other $75, because the total cost was $225, is going to have to be paid by Jill out of her pocket. And assuming that prices don't go up or down at the nursing home over this time period, we're going to look at Jill here for 2 years of care. For the next 667 days, that same contribution formula is going to work. The insurance company is going to pay $150. And then Jill is going to pay $75 to get the total $225 that the nursing home is charged. So that's going to continue again for 667 days after the exclusion period ended. Now, the reason it's going to end after 667 days is we'll have reached the policy maximum of $100,000. So these are just a couple summary tables. It's the same information we just did, but in numbers. So again, she entered the nursing home on May 1st. The first 14 days was 100% out-of-pocket cost. So that was her writing the checks for that. For the next 667 days, the insurance paid $150 per day. That was the daily maximum. She had to make up the remaining $75 each day to get to the $225 total that the insurance or the nursing home was charging. And then the last 49 days that she stayed to complete her 2-year stay here, the insurance is going to pay nothing and she'll have to pay the full $225 again. And the reason again that happened is after 667 days, she has maxed out the policy $100,000 lifetime limit. So I also want to make one other point, and we have a Mont guide on this as well. There's what's called a long-term care partnership insurance policy. And the word partnership is the important piece there. It's a special type of long-term care policy, and it has to have a couple specific features, one of them being that the benefits have to be inflation adjusted. So the primary reason that you would get one of these is the insurance payment from a long-term care partnership policy or a traditional policy is going to be the same, assuming the benefit periods and those kind of things were the same. But it's going to protect an equal amount from Medicaid recovery. And I think Marcia might be talking a little bit about Medicaid after me to explain the recovery portion. But it's going to provide some protection to your assets. So an example here would be that, let's say that Ann's has her only assets or certificates of deposits valued at $90,000. So she has no other assets. She doesn't own a home or a car or anything. That's what she has. But she also has a long-term care partnership policy for $100,000. So Ann enters the nursing home and she's able to pay the monthly cost between her long-term care policy benefits and the remainder of her current income, or if she draws down some on her CDs as well. So once that policy has paid the $100,000, Ann will become Medicaid eligible without spending down her other assets. And I think Marcia will probably talk about the assets test here in a minute in her portion. But that partnership policy is going to protect up to $100,000 of Ann's assets. In this case, she only had $90,000 of assets when she entered the facility, so it's really going to protect all of those assets from Medicaid recovery in the event that she needs care beyond the term of the insurance policy. So that would be the benefit. We certainly have a Mont guide that's going to go into some additional details there as well. And I do see we had a question come in about whether the lifetime limit is adjusted for inflation. That does not have to be adjusted for inflation. It's the daily rate is the one that oftentimes for partnership policies is required to. So that's certainly, if you're considering purchasing one of these, you can certainly ask that question to your insurance agent about which portions are inflation adjusted, but the lifetime limit, my guess is not generally inflation adjusted, but you can certainly discuss that with your insurance company. And thank you for the question. So with that, I am going to put up one more slide here. Certainly happy to take additional questions. Marcia mentioned too the Solid Finances webinar series that I run, which is a little bit like today's session where we provide some education about some different financial topics. This is the remainder of our winter and spring schedules. So tomorrow we're up with student loans and then some tips for credit managing and then setting investment goals. Looking at different ways to access retirement funds early, and then finally we'll end with preparing to meet with an investment advisor. So if you're interested in this free series, there's the website, or send me an email. Happy to get you in touch with getting registered for this series and getting you lined up so that you can participate those. And we had another question of, will I teach these? I will be teaching the February 17th, 24th, and March 3rd sessions. Dr. Carrie Johnson, my counterpart from North Dakota State University, will be teaching tomorrow and then also on February 3rd as well. So we do oftentimes have guest speakers, and Marcia Getting has certainly been one of our regular guests in the series over the years. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing here. And Emily, are there any additional questions that I have not already addressed?
Did you see the question asking if the lifetime limit adjusts for inflation for long-term care insurance?
Yes, yep, we did address that one. And again, I think it generally does not necessarily have to, but it is something you should certainly check with your insurance agent about. And I do say I got a private question here as well. Do you have to continue paying premiums after you enter a skilled living facility? My guess is that yes, you would continue to make those insurance payments while you're in there, just like health insurance. You'd continue to keep that policy open and active. And let's see. I think that's the only other question for me. It looks like there's one more in there that I think Marcia will gather at the end of today that I think was related to a previous session. So with that, Marcia, I'll certainly stay on to take additional questions at the end, but I will turn it over to you.
Okay.
Okay.
Joel, I think someone sent one maybe to me privately on accident. Someone was asking if the exclusionary period dovetails with Medicare provisions.
If the exclusionary period, well, Medicare is not going to generally provide any long-term care benefits unless it's rehabilitation care. So if someone, again, fell, broke their hip, went to the hospital, Medicare may pay for a short period of long-term care as a recovery period in the facility directly. Now, Medicaid, you're only eligible for Medicaid. Marcia's going to go over this once you've kind of met the assets and income portions of that test. So I wouldn't think about it, I think, in the way of dovetailing with the two. I would think of it as just a period that you're going to have to handle on an out-of-pocket basis.
Okay, Joel, if you'll toss the WebEx ball to me, then I'll be able to share screen, I think. There we go. Okay. Ta-da. Well, thank you very much, Joel. Appreciate that information. And I think that's right along the lines of some of the questions that we've had in the past. And I'm sure there may be additional questions that come up as we proceed through this morning. So keeping with my theme of some wildflowers, I just thought I'd share this is common beargrass. This happens to be common butterwort. And common blue-eyed grass is what this looks like. So this makes me think, why in the world am I using common? Aha, common worry. And I think what I see here is perhaps a generational difference. I think the older generation would be, oh, well, I have to go on Medicaid. And I think the next generation is, well, how will I qualify for Medicaid with the expectation that it's for me? But as you know, Joel told you it was designed to be a low net worth, a low income type of program. So I thought I would ask, do you know someone who is on Medicaid? So a very quick poll question there, and you can check a yes or no. Do you know someone who is on Medicaid? And of course, if I was answering it, I would say, yes, I do. You've got individuals out there that may have MS, other kinds of long-term, really difficult situations where they need to be in the nursing home. Okay, Emily, let's see what we've got for our responses here. So there's about half of you that do have someone that you know with Medicaid. See, I can confuse them there too. And I'm also delighted to see that the number of people that aren't answering has gone down. We did have about half of you not responding. So maybe that means you figured out the poll, you figured out how to do it, and that's great. We love to have that there. So let's take a look. I found some figures that 61% of Montanans in our nursing homes do receive Medicaid assistance. And if you're going to qualify for Medicaid, there's 3 tests that you have to, sort of make the qualifications for. There's one that's circumstances, assets, and income. And I knew about the assets and income, but I hadn't paid that much attention to circumstances. And circumstances kind of reminds me of this old man of the mountain type flower, because it says you must be 65 or older, you must be a resident of the United States, a Montana resident for our Medicaid, and also have a social security number, and you have a doctor that have said you need to be in a nursing home. So that's the circumstances test. Then when we get to the asset test, they have what they call resources that are countable, but they also have resources that are excluded. So your countable resources include quite a few things. If you have a non-home real estate, you've got a condo somewhere, you've got a lake home, etc. Your vehicles, any kind of your checking and savings accounts, even United States savings bonds are countable resources. Your stocks and bonds and mutual funds, any kind of investment like that, they're going to add into this total to see if you qualify. Now, those of you that have retirement plans, KEO, IRAs, whether they be traditional or Roth, there's SEP plans, there's simple plans out there, 401ks, 403bs, and 457 plans. You see, there's a wide variety, and what Medicaid is saying is we have to include those as countable resources before you're going to qualify for Medicaid. Now, some others that maybe we're not as familiar with would include your life estates. If you've got a life estate there, the folks in the Sydney area of the state, oil and mineral rights. And notice this, assets in a revocable living trust. You see, we had at some time a disbarred attorney from North Dakota coming into eastern Montana and telling people if they would establish a revocable living trust, they would immediately qualify for Medicaid. No, no. If you've got a revocable trust, there's the term, it's revocable. And because it's revocable, you have control over that. And because you have control, it's going to be included as a countable asset. And then they do have cash value that you might have in life insurance. So basically, as you think about countable resources, just think of it as any asset over which an individual age 65 and up has control over. That's the key. Now, Emily, are there any resources that are excluded from this countable resource?
Yes. So some of the things that are excluded from those countable resources include your home, in a single family home. So if the person applying for Medicaid was living in it and they expect to return to it within 6 months, that home is not included. The home is also excluded if it's used as the primary residence for the applicant's spouse or other dependents. Some other excluded resources include personal effects. So ordinary household goods, they're not going to count the computer or the appliances in your house as resources in this test.
Well, that's good to know. If you've got 2 computers in the place, at least those are excluded.
Also, the cash value of life insurance that is a total value of $1,500 or less is also excluded.
So that means we get to keep a total of $1,500. Yay.
Other things that are excluded include your burial plot. So whatever that is worth is not counted as an asset here. Also, your burial fund up to $1,500 is an excluded asset. Irrevocable burial contracts, which can be made on a Montana-approved form with the funeral home. If you have one of those burial contracts that are irrevocable, those also are excluded. So then we have a poll question for you. So in Montana especially, this is a question that could come up pretty frequently. Do you think livestock animals are an excluded resource? Just answer yes or no. for that poll question. And don't forget to hit the submit button.
Yes, I kept forgetting to do that when I first did this because it's way down on the bottom of the page. So Emily, when you're famous enough to redo this page, which you can't do, of course, we'll move that submit button up.
So let's take a look. It looks like we had 16 folks who said yes, they are an excluded resource, but most of the people who answered said that no, livestock are not an excluded resource. So let's find out what the answer actually is. So it may surprise a lot of you that livestock actually are considered an excluded resource, meaning they can't be counted toward those assets when looking at whether you qualify. They are excluded if they're used to produce income, if they're raised for home consumption, or even if they're used as pets, which I think probably covers most of the reason people have livestock in Montana.
Yeah.
Other excluded resources are income producing property, up to $6,000 worth of that equity value. So, Marcia, how are marital assets counted?
I'm glad you asked because there were some parts of this that really surprised me. Now, you know, we do have a Mont guide on Medicare and long-term care costs. And so that required a bit of research and to try to find out what to include. And the first time I did it, it was so long that I would fall asleep writing it. So during this period of time, I've been redoing that. So let's see, this happens to be a Mariposa lily. Aha, so Mara, I know that's a stretch, but we're looking at the marital assets. And what they're going to do is consider the assets of both spouses. And it doesn't make any difference. I emphasize whose name's on the title. But if you have a married couple and he has sole ownership and she has sole ownership, what they're going to do is put both of those together as, you know, a total asset. And so it's all separately owned, real property and personal property. And when they're talking about personal, again, it's not necessarily the computers, etc. They consider checking accounts, savings accounts, and certificates of deposit as assets. So again, solely owned property is included if the couple is married. And if you have joint tenancy property, and this where it comes in where sometimes we've got grandma in particular who is wanting to add their daughter's name to an asset and thinking, well, that, you know, that'll exempt it. No, it's joint tenancy and therefore it's going to be included, even if it has your grandchildren's name on it. For example, you were thinking, well, what I'm going to do is put a grandson's name on there as a joint tenant because you want him to have it when you're gone. Well, that doesn't exclude it from this asset thing. So I guess I would say a Tuesday tip for the Mariposa lily is to consider the assets that you have, and almost everyone is included except for those that Emily mentioned aren't there. Now, one of the things that we can do too now that we couldn't do in the old days is the actual Medicaid manual is on the web. So you can go there, and I know it's thick and detailed, but if you're the kind of person that likes to do that kind of research so that you know your parents or your in-laws would be eligible, that would be a place to go as well. Now, this is a flower. It's called a Corydalis. Didn't know what it was when I saw it in Glacier National Park after the fire. This was one of the first ones to come back. So I've got a couple. We've got Cory and Dallas, and they have children from an earlier marriage. Now, Cory has assets of $100,000. Dallas has $800,000. So if we're looking at a Medicaid application, what we're going to see is total assets for that couple of $900,000. So we move through time, and what Cory and Dallas did before they got married is they had a premarital agreement. And the reason they did that is they were both wanting to say, okay, we want to leave our respective estates to our children. But a premarital contract does not work. It simply doesn't matter. All assets are countable resources for Medicaid eligibility test. So they've got the will. They say we want to be able to distribute this to their children. And we got some problems. It just doesn't matter. And also the will doesn't even take effect until you die. So the will isn't a tool that you can use to make yourself eligible for Medicaid. So we follow this couple along, and this is a real example. It was really sad because 2 years after they were married, Corey was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. But all of the property of both were considered as countable resources. Now, there is some protection for the spouse. So this is a question for you. What is the amount that Dallas can keep out of that $900,000? What is the amount of resources that can be protected for her? 900,000, 450,000, 250, or 130,380. So if you don't know, just take a guess. Until I studied this, I would have just had to take a guess, because this is an amount that is actually triggered for inflation. So every year it changes. For a long time, it was the same amount, but now it changes. So are we getting lots of responses, Emily? Okay, let's see what people are thinking. Okay, we've got 37% that said 450,000. We've got 11% that said 250. And then we've got 14% that said 130,380. And I can see if I was going to do that again, I wouldn't make those top three even. I would make it because some of you, I betcha, were thinking about the maximum. And yeah, it isn't exact. So the thing is, out of that $900,000, then the maximum for the spousal protection there is $130,380. Okay. So what about this remainder? There's $869,620 left. Not swins, $620. So that is the amount that perhaps you've heard this term, the spin down amount. So for Corey to be able to get Medicaid expenses covered, that amount must be spent down to $2,000 for him to be able to be eligible for Medicaid. So as we look at this summary, you know, there's these resources that are countable, there's some that are excluded, and yes, there is some protection for the spouse. And we did learn that wills and premarital agreements are not tools, not legal documents that are really going to protect any of those assets. So the daughter that was sharing this story with me, and it was really kind of comical. I mean, you got to laugh about some of these things. She said, you know, I should have told mom, just live in sin and don't get married. And well, okay, maybe that's not the best solution there, but she was also concerned that saying, you know, it's not fair. What is happening is mom married this man, and that man is the money that my dad earned is being spent on that man. So there's some family issues that may come into play there as well. Now, these are Palmer's Penstemans, and what are they telling me? The income test. They are yakking, as you can tell, talking about income. Now, most of the income that's received in the applicant is countable. So that's looking at Social Security coming in. We've got retirement pensions that are there, railroad retirement income, and even VA benefits. All of those are coming in on the income test. So if we have lease and rental income, that counts. any kind of dividends, and interest earnings. These are all considered as a part of the income test. How about trust income? Yep, you've got to do those trusts in the correct way if you want to exclude that income. In other words, if you've got an irrevocable trust that doesn't give money to the Medicaid applicant, then that wouldn't be counted. But if it does go to the applicant, yes, it counts. And then if you've purchased any annuities, those would be included. So kind of the rule is that if you've got any income, that income must go towards your nursing home payment. So if your cost of the nursing home care is greater than that income, you've already met the income test. So let's just remember that all income is counted when we're determining eligibility. Then we've got the Jones-Columbine. Okay, now I hope you notice how short that is. That's one that's up in the mountains in Waterton and very, very short, not like the tall we're used to. So Emily, how about you share the story of Mr. and Mrs. Jones?
Okay, so we'll look at Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and in this case, Mr. Jones is the one who is institutionalized. He's the one that needs long-term care. In this case, oh, do you want to go back to that one? Maybe not.
Sorry.
All the income in the nursing home spouse's name is counted for the income test, like Marcia had mentioned. But what about Mrs. Jones? We'll talk about Mr. Jones first. As part of that income, there can be $50 per month deducted that does not have to be used to pay for the long-term care. So the standard rule is that there's $50 per month that can pay for personal expenses.
Sorry, I got a heavy finger there. My apologies, Emily.
Okay. And then the other rule is that Mr. Jones can pay a monthly health insurance premium out of his income, and that will also not be counted towards the income that should be paid toward his long-term care.
Yeah, and this was just like what Joel was saying, that, you know, it would still be paid.
Mm-hmm. So because I know it's hard to follow that sometimes without an example, so let's look at Mr. Jones. Let's say that he personally has a monthly income of $3,000. We can take $50 out of that we say he can use to buy things like food, magazines, clothes, things like that. And then let's say his health insurance premium is $550 per month. So that means that he gets to keep $600 of that monthly income. So $600 does not have to go toward paying his long-term care costs. So what he's left with is $2,400 that's available for him to pay for the nursing home cost. So let's say that the cost of care for Mr. Jones is $7,670 per month. Well, we subtract the $2,400 that has been determined he can pay for his long-term care, which means that he's left with $5,270 over that amount. So that $5,270 is then paid by Medicaid. So let's talk about Mrs. Jones, who is not living in a long-term care facility, and that spouse is what is determined in legalese as the community spouse.
Yeah, that's very confusing. You know, you got the institutionalized spouse, you've got the community spouse. Just getting familiar with all this terminology when you're reading these things is a challenge. So you have my sympathy out there, folks.
So the community spouse, Mrs. Jones, remember, she's not institutionalized. She can keep all of the income that is paid solely in her name. So if she has a part-time job or Social Security benefits, right, Marcia, that would be paid just to her, she can keep all of that income for herself. None of that has to go towards paying the long-term care expenses of Mr. Jones. But if you have income coming in the names of both spouses, let's say a rental property, maybe that, then half would go to the institutionalized spouse and half would be designated for the community spouse. So as we're thinking about the Jones-Columbine, just remember Mr. and Mrs. Jones situations. Remember that we have an institutionalized spouse and a community spouse, and how the income is counted depends on who whose name that income is being brought in under. So, Marcia, there's something called look-back rules that has to do with Medicaid. Can you explain what those are?
Okay, and that's something you may have heard about as well. And I'm selecting a blue flax to sort of represent that look-back period. And that's because we got the Blues Brothers. And the Blues Brothers have decided they want to become impoverished so that they could qualify for Medicaid assistance. Well, I think there's legal, tax, and emotional aspects of a decision to do something like that. So first, I'll ask you, what do you think is the look back period at the present time? We've got 7 years, 5 years, 3 years, or 2 years. What is the look back period that Montana considers? And I will say, while Montana has its own Medicaid rules, they pretty much have to be based on what the feds do. Because what happens is if Medicaid is going to get the federal money into our state, we have to follow some of those rules. Others we could change just a little bit, but there are some that are just very specific or we don't get the money. Okay, Emily, what have we got here for responses from folks? Okay, we've got 10% of you thinking it's a 7-year look back period. 49, half of you just about, said 5 years. And that is the answer that is correct. That is what they're going to do, is look back. And we've had to do this 5-year look back period since the year 2006. That's when legislation was passed to make this a new rule. Now, let's look at how that particular approach is used, because what they're looking back to is to say, gee, did you transfer any property out of your name into somebody else's name? That's a gift. And were you trying to make yourself eligible for Medicaid? Well, for a while, that was illegal. And, you know, we had an attorney general going after people doing that. So what they do is they have this period of ineligibility. In other words, if you're going to give away something, then they're going to divide it by the number of days that would have been spent for these expenses in the nursing home. So they call that the uncompensated value with it. So we know, according to the stats that Montana is using right now, they're using a monthly average of $7,670 a day, which was real close to that figure that Joel gave you from Genworth. So they look at that and they say, okay, the cost of care is $252.18 per day. And one of the Blues Brothers by the name of John decided what he was going to do is give away a whole bunch of stocks and bonds. So he gives away $195,000 in 2021. Now, there is a federal gift tax exclusion, so to speak, but that really doesn't come into play here. So what is the number of days that you think John is ineligible to receive Medicaid because of this gift that he gave away? So if you're a quick mathematician, you can sort of do the division, but that's how we do the look back period and find out those ineligible days. So let's take a look here. And Emily, do we have some responses coming in? Okay, we're kind of spread all over with many of you not answering because you're thinking, how would I know? Well, that might be true, but 13% said 845 days. We had 9% said 773, and we had another 6% saying 693. So let's see what we've got here. Well, what's my answer? Marcia, where's the answer? There it is. Yay. So we're looking at John's gifts. We divide that by the number of days, and then we divide that to just get a sense of how long it's going to be. And so basically what we know is Blue's brother John is going to be ineligible for Medicaid for a little over 2 years because he applied and they went back to the look back period of 5 years. So the question then is, how are we going to pay the nursing home costs for John? Are we going to ask for money back? There's a problem there because he tried to be eligible and it turns out he really wasn't because he gave away assets and they came within that look back period. Now, had he applied for Medicaid after that 5 years, that would have not affected what was going on because once you hit the 5 years, that time is effective. Now, they are going to exclude some of these things. Emily was mentioning some, but even from that, if you have the community spouse in the house, if you have a child that's less than age 21, or an adult child blind or permanently disabled. So it's not like we force somebody to sell the house. And there's another exemption here. If you are a child that have moved in with mom and dad and you've lived there for 2 years, and that's what allowed the parent to remain at home for that period of time, which saved, yourself money and the government money as well, then that's a transfer that is excluded. And then also if you happen to be living with a sibling, you've got a brother or sister, you guys were living together, then that's an excluded transfer because both of you are in that house. So I guess my Tuesday tip for the Blue Flax is you really want to make sure that you have enough resources to cover the 5-year look back period. I would hate to see an example where grandma is out there and the kids receive the money and they don't help out with something like that. Well, my observation from the lady slippers, time has really slipped away. I think you're probably about ready to slip out for lunch. So we hope that you will think about joining us next week when we're going to get into powers of attorney. We're going to look at the financial power that the state of Montana has, as well as a healthcare power of attorney that has been developed for our state. And so Emily and I really appreciate your participation in our webinars. And we once again want to thank our guest, Joel, for providing us with information about long-term care costs. So Emily is going to put up some information to give you a chance to tell us your opinion and fill out evaluations. And I think we learned last time, Emily, I can stop sharing the screen and this shouldn't go away. Is that correct?
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to cover my eyes. I hope you guys can still see it because I can't.
Yeah, it's still there.
It's still there. Okay. See, I thought it wasn't. Okay. Joel, are you back? Questions that you may have.
Okay, so we actually have quite a few that came in throughout that. I will say there was someone who popped in really early in the session saying that they were still confused about transfer on death deeds from last week. That person will get you maybe at the end, but I want to make sure we answer the ones relevant to this week first. If you have to hop off before then, we'll follow up with an email for you. So we'll go ahead with the other ones. Let me scroll to the top of our chat questions here.
Joel, I hope they're all for you, so you can answer them.
Someone was asking, this had to do with the long-term care insurance. It was a question or a comment, I suppose, that came in after, saying to be sure to ask if your premiums continue after you enter an approved facility. So Joel, I don't know if you want to speak on that at all.
Yeah, you will continue to pay your policy premiums, just like your health insurance. That's what keeps the policy open and active. So you could be paying monthly premiums and receiving a benefit from your policy at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
And I might throw out something there that with our long-term care policy, they wanted the name of someone that they could contact if I would stop paying, so that we make sure that we keep them. Because I was saying, well, gee, if I get Alzheimer's and I forget to pay, then we're done. And so they arranged for another person that could step in and help, at least notify the company that what's going on. So I thought that was a good idea.
So then this is another question that has more to do with Medicare and long-term care insurance. It used to be that if you spent 3 days in the hospital, Medicare would pay up to 100 days of nursing home care, possibly calling it rehabilitation. Is that what that was, Joel?
Yeah, I don't have the specific numbers, but that's certainly kind of a common process that if you were in the hospital and then your next step of care is to leave the hospital but not yet go home, that is where Medicare can step in and pay for it in terms of it's a rehabilitation stay. And I'm sure they do have a maximum number on that your rehabilitation stay cannot be 5 years. But I don't have that number in front of me unless, Marcia, do you have it?
Yeah, it's 100 days.
Okay.
And it's for that particular problem. If you come back, you go back to the hospital and you've got another problem, health issue, then it restarts that 100 days over. But if it's related to the same, nope, you got to pay for it.
Okay. So I think a lot of the remainder of these are for the Medicaid portion, Marcia.
Okay.
This one is asking about the excluded burial fund. Does that need to be separated somehow at the bank? And what about any interest that's paid into the burial fund account? Is that also excluded from Medicaid eligibility?
Yeah, right. Right now it wouldn't be a lot. What is the interest on $1,500? I think I'm earning 0.02 something on mine with that. And it's ironic that some way has not been attached to inflation as well, because it's been that $1,500 for years and years. And I would think that it would be appropriate to up that particular amount.
Okay. So then for that burial fund, does that need to be separated and designated specifically in its own account at the bank, or how do you designate that as a burial fund?
Yeah, you could put that on the memo line for it and just keep the 1,500 and, as the interest accumulates, do that. But that irrevocable one is really good because it makes it super clear. It's with, it's an irrevocable contract, and the nursing or the funeral director is accepting that, and it's proof.
Okay. So another question about determining Medicaid eligibility: how are family farm corporations treated? Do they consider the total shares of both husband and wife?
Mm-hmm. They do. That's definitely a part of the procedure. And in that Medicaid manual, they have a couple of examples that they go through to show with a corporation, an LLC, and partnership type situations. And when you have a question like that, and I know it's kind of challenging, but it used to be we had a Medicaid specialist in all the counties across Montana. And because of funding cuts, now they're kind of in groupings, and then there's a major one that's located in Helena. So when you have a specific question, you don't have to tell them your name. It's just say you're interested. Is this eligible? And they may say, well, I need more information. And you'll have to get that information if you're wanting to get a sense of your specific situation.
Okay, and then just to clarify on that, if you were to say gift some of your shares of the family farm corporation to a child within that look back period, it would still count against you, right?
Yeah, it would still go to the kids, but the value of that, in a corporation, every year you're supposed to get together and establish the value of the stock. There would be a value there, and then we would divide that into, if it's included in that 5 years. So you can give it away, but you may pay a consequence depending on exactly when you qualify.
Someone asked, you did touch on this a little bit, but they're asking about more information on an irrevocable trust to protect assets from Medicaid.
We don't have a Mont guide in that, Joel, that might be a project for us in the future, but what you can get the definition certainly from the Medicaid manual, but also in visiting with an attorney. There are attorneys out there that will say, I do Medicaid planning. There are other attorneys that say, I won't touch it. So there's these different value systems out there on that. Sometimes when I'm looking for something and I'm just not sure, I even go to the web myself and say, okay, Irrevocable Trust Montana. And when I do that, what I discover is there's all these forms, and they say they're state qualified. Well, maybe not with something like that. So visit with an attorney about doing an irrevocable trust and what would be included, at least until we get a mock guide done.
Okay, so another question that came up, can an irrevocable trust stipulate funds to the spouse and therefore be excluded from income analysis?
I really don't know. I think that would come into the income for the spouse. There's some other protections for the spouse that I didn't really get into. But I know if it went to that spouse and the spouse was applying for Medicaid, it wouldn't work. And it's whether or not it falls within this income section that the spouse is allowed for expenses of the home, utilities, and all that type of thing.
Okay. Another question. So regarding that income section about Medicaid and paying for long-term care, health insurance premiums can still be paid. Can long-term care insurance and funeral trust be paid and excluded from income?
Those are still eligible income exclusionary things.
Okay.
It's just think about it though. You're in the nursing home and you want to keep up those policies. So how can you do that if you've got all your, if you've used up all your reserves? Hello, kids, or hello, family. How are we going to handle those types of things? And of course, once we run out, then Medicaid would come in at that point.
Okay. So in that example we had with the Joneses, if he was paying $550 for health insurance plus another amount for long-term care insurance, he could take that out of his income as well.
Yeah. Okay. And thanks for that question, because that would be a really good addition to put to that. And I noticed Joel didn't get in the philosophy about long-term care insurance. You see, we don't still think of it as something that's as important as auto insurance, homeowners insurance, and those types of things. And I'm hoping that someday more of us will think about that, because it will help bring down the cost. The more of us that pay in, the less expensive it is. But right now, doggone, I gotta say, it is expensive. But then I calculated out how much we spent with my mom in a nursing home, and it wasn't difficult to come to the conclusion that had to bite the bullet and get long-term care insurance. If Alzheimer's runs in your family, you look at things a little bit differently.
Another question, just a clarification someone wanted on what a community spouse is. So the community spouse is the legal term for the spouse that is not living in a long-term care facility. So they're still living at home. I'm sure it would also include someone who's maybe living with a child or something, right? But they're just not institutionalized.
Right.
Yeah. So hopefully that clears that up a little bit.
Yeah, I would prefer the term nursing home spouse over institutionalized spouse, but they come up with their own terms.
Someone is asking how you start applying for the Medicaid process. Is that something that's in the Medicaid guide, Marcia?
Yes, I've got the directions there. There is a toll-free number that you can call, and it's Pacific something. But anyway, get the Mont guide, and it's at our resource page for Tuesday tips. And I can almost see it on the page. It's down a little ways, and it gives you that number. And you can even start applying online if you want to, which is a new way of doing it with all the offices that are closed and people working remotely.
And I did put the link to that Medicaid and long-term care guide in the chat, so you should be able to just copy and paste that if you would like that. Another question, as far as excluding your home because the community spouse is living in it, so excluding it from resources, does that person have to be a traditionally married spouse, or does it count if they're a life partner?
Oh boy. We have a mock guide that is called Montana Common Law Marriages. So the simple solution to this one is probably you won't want to claim that you're married, because if you're married, everything is included. And if you're living together, it wouldn't be. But what you need to do is really take a close look of that Montana common law marriage, because that has all kinds of impact for your estate planning. And that is for both spouses to think about. So it's not a 7-year thing or a 5-year thing, and all of a sudden you're a common law marriage. No, no. There's other examples, and I have all of those in the mock guide. So great question. Read that mock guide.
Okay, someone is asking for clarification on what you meant by spend down of resources. They asked if that's a monthly amount.
Okay, now when we were looking at the amount of resources of our couple that had 900,000, and I was just using that roughly without getting into the details, what we're seeing is, well, there's 900,000 there, and she is allowed to keep a certain amount. And then the rest of that is not money to throw away. What it is money. That money could be used to pay nursing home costs up to a certain point in time. It could be used to replace the roof. There's things that it could be logically spent on to make the house more easier to care for by the spouse that's still living in the home. So I've got some definitions in the mock guide of examples of how spin down can occur.
Okay. We actually had another question from someone else who came up about something similar, asking what you spend it on, and I think you just answered that. And they're also asking if that spend down fits in the look back period.
No, when you're spending down and you're using it for what I would call real expenses, then you're going to be fine. But if you're using it to gift money to the grandkids and other individuals, then it wouldn't be. So they're depending on you to report these kinds of things. So yes, any real expenses, there was one gentleman that was recommending, well, buy some jewelry because that is exempt. Well, this is not what that money was intended to do. And so I'm sorry, I'm getting some ethics in there. So I'll back off that one. But you could buy a car. You could, because the spouse may need a functional car that operates in the kind of weathers that we have in Montana.
Hopefully that answered that question. If there's any more confusion about that, please feel free to ask for some clarity there. Someone is asking if there's any kind of account that could be set up for long-term care if needed, and if not needed, it would go to your beneficiaries. Is there some type of account like that?
Well, one thing that you might consider opening is a Montana medical care savings account. Montana allows you to put up to $4,000 for one spouse, $4,000 for the other spouse, and you don't even have to spend it. And we've got some people that have been doing that since 1997 when this law first came into Montana. And I would ask them, I say, well, why don't you use it when you have the medical expenses? And they say, we know that, because of our family situation, we're going to have more expenses at the end of our life than we are right now. And we're able to pay those right now. So right now they're saving $4,000, $8,000 a year. And then what you can do is put a payable on death designation on that account. And not only that, you can actually use it for anybody. The last legislative session changed it to where we can use an MSA. So I've got one couple, they have they have over $50,000 in that account. And they could use it not only for their grandkids and children, but if they had a good friend that had cancer, they could use it for that too, or they can use it later in life. It's up to them. And besides, you'll save money on taxes, $276 if you put aside $4,000 at this point in time.
And we do have a Mont guide on Montana medical savings accounts too. And we also have some recorded Tuesday tips on that, so you can certainly dive into that a little deeper if you want. This is another question about family farms. If the family farm is in a family trust that the person needing care is not part of, is that counted toward the assets?
Don't know about that one. Is the person mentioned in the family trust? Is the person getting income from the family trust? And would we count that as a asset or income? Any ideas on that, Joel?
Well, the only thing I would just say is to look very closely at what that trust agreement says, because I think that's going to determine whether that person has any beneficial use of the property, or maybe they just have a right to an income stream, at which point the income might be counted, but maybe not the actual asset. So, but I think it's important to just look very closely at what that trust agreement actually says.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Emily, are we about done with our questions?
We still have a couple if you're
okay
for answering a couple more. Another one, this is more of a comment, I suppose, but someone was saying that another aspect in quality of care, is it possible that it wouldn't be the best under Medicaid?
Okay, what they say is there's no difference. Okay, at the same time, with a friend in Western Montana, and she is on Medicaid, and she had to double up in a room and listen to someone who is very ill, hollering all the time. And it can be very stressful, even though the quality of care is going to be the same for her as somebody else. It's just that two people in a room can be a disadvantage, that's for sure.
Another question that came up, if you have a reason to believe that you might be headed for a nursing home, is it a good idea to apply for Medicaid just to get the 5-year look back rolling?
No, you can't apply for Medicaid until you are in the nursing home. And typically what happens is that they will do a resource assessment, not necessarily an application for Medicaid, but to get the sense of what is it you had when you went in. So, we can't go back and say, doggone it, why didn't we buy that long-term care insurance? But we really need to look at our resources and see what we think is going to happen. And I know we want to protect it, but it just may not be possible depending on your situation.
So what about people who are on Medicaid before entering the nursing home, like their income had qualified them for Medicaid? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, and we've got people that are on SSI and disability and some things like that. They're already qualified. So if they go into the nursing home, it's not like that's going to change. They've already been pre-qualified based on being under 65 and meeting other rules and regulations.
Okay. And then there's one more that came up. Can filing a homestead exclusion protect the house from being included in Medicaid income? And does it also protect from creditors? So I think they're talking about the homestead declaration.
Yeah, you can do a homestead declaration for protection up to $250. But Montana law is very specific that does not exclude Medicaid coming in and taking the home. Now, they've told me there is no home that has the state of Montana forced to be sold. On the other hand, there are situations where it's the family that's deciding. There's no money there for mom. Where is the money? The money is in the house. So what we're going to do as a family is to decide we sell the house. but they can slap a lien on it or place a lien, and then it would have to be paid off after the house is sold when mama's gone.
Someone piped in with a comment here saying, remember, many people qualify for community Medicaid. We would suggest getting the resource allotment done sooner if a community spouse plans to remain in the community. Do you have any comments about that?
I don't. I'm not familiar with that approach. So somebody can educate me, the person that's asking the question. If you want to email me, thank you. I would appreciate that.
And then just for everybody's reference, I am putting Marsha's email in the chat, so you can.
Okay, thank you. I'm losing your voice, Emily.
Oh, interesting.
There you go. Okay.
Okay. Maybe I was just cutting in and out for a second. I think that's all the questions we have. We do have that one question that was asked about transfer on death deeds earlier, but it looks like that person is no longer on the call, so we'll follow up with them.
Okay, if you'd send that to me, I'll follow up. Well, listen, you have asked lots of questions, and I'm delighted. We all learn in the process. So I'd like to extend another thank you to Joel for joining us today, and Emily, great job as usual. And I'll look forward for Tuesday tips next week. And now I'm going to shut off real quick because I'm supposed to be at an Alzheimer work group meeting, and we're doing those virtually as well. So thank you again, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.